Normally we start on activist time like 10 or 15 minutes late, but it's so full we can't really fit any more people in here. So welcome, thanks for coming. This is obviously exciting moment to have these two folks, and I think it's obvious why at a moment like this when the question of diversity of tactics and so on are so high on people's agenda. But they're going to talk about a lot more than that, I think. I just wanted to mention, I'm not actually going to introduce them. Sam Green, who's the director of the definitive Weather Underground movie, I think it's fair to say.
There's a couple other ones.
Okay, there's a couple other ones. His is called The Weather Underground. And it's the only one I've heard of. And it's an amazing film. He's also made several other amazing films, and he's making a film right now on Buckminster Fuller. I also wanted to mention tomorrow morning, Bill and Bernardine will be at the Yes Lab, which every Friday people get together to brainstorm creative actions and carry them out over the course of the semester. And tomorrow's a full day from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. The rest of the semester it's in the afternoon only, around 2:30 to 4. Everybody's welcome to come. There's already some projects rolling. You can come with your own project idea, or better yet, plug into something that's already going on and help make it happen. Change will be happening tomorrow, and Bill and Bernardine will be there to talk about projects and offer their feedback.
No, we're listening.
And listening. Learning, listening, and helping. What?
What was the location?
Yes Lab, sorry, good question. That's tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. at 721 Broadway, Tisch on Broadway and Washington Place. 720. Huh? Sixth floor, yeah, performance studies. 6th floor of 721 Broadway. I'll repeat that at the end, but it's 721. And bring IDs. You need IDs to get in. So that's that. And also tonight at 10 p.m., there's an action that we can all go to, and I'm making sure I can announce it publicly, but I'll tell you at the end as well. It'll be very, very fun and involve a very popular music group. So without further ado, I'll introduce, and, yeah, so stay, disclaimer that is at the very end. Sam Green, the director of the Weather Underground, introduce.
Hey.
I'll try to use this. I'm really honored to be here in Jacques' class and introducing these two. I've known them for a long time now. The late 90s, I guess. The 20th century. We go back to the 20th century. And I got in touch with them with a friend of mine named Bill Siegel. We wanted to make this movie about the Weather Underground, and so we contacted them in, I think, the mid-90s to begin with. And we're really inspired to do that project because it felt like, for me, there was so little happening politically. This was before Seattle. It's almost a hard time to remember now, the mid-90s. But I knew lots of people who were radical or kind of seemed radical, but it was all cultural and not necessarily about organized politics. And so the story of the Weather Underground had resonated with me, and I thought that it would perhaps do so for other people. It was a complex story, a morally complex story, and it just sort of got me, and I thought that it might other people too, and I thought also that it was a way to get a lot of history that people weren't learning in school necessarily or on TV about a lot of other movements from the 60s, and so that seemed great. So that's how I came to know them, and that was the mid-90s. It's funny, 15 years later, the world is so different, and it's hard almost to remember what it was like before, but obviously, the great thing about history is that it's always in dialogue with the present. And so the reasons that story would resonate 15 years ago are different than how it resonates now. But I'm really excited to be here because I think there's some obvious resonances. Occupy is a huge one, but a lot of what's happening. And so I'm looking forward to a conversation about that and trying to look at the past in some ways to understand the present better, which I think is a valuable exercise. But the one thing I wanted to say before we get started is that one of the things I've always admired about Bill and Bernadine is that they are not stereotypical baby boomers, you know, the old people saying like, our music, you guys don't know music, we rocked. You know, they are not that in several important ways. And one of them, I think, is that they are not frozen in time. They've both done millions of important and interesting things since Weather Underground. And I think during the whole campaign thing, at one point, Bill, you said, or somebody said, like, I've written 12 books. I'm not, you know, I'm a lot more than that guy who 40 years ago did this or that. And so that's important to remember. And the other thing that I've always admired about them, too, that in how they differ from the stereotype is that they actually have a lot of respect for young people and are interested in young people. I've come across the baby boomers who say, like, man, you guys don't know. You know, and that's a common attitude, but it's refreshing that they are interested in young people and care what they have to say, and also know that if the world is going to change, it's going to happen through the young people here and everywhere else. So I'm sure they're interested in hearing what you have to say. I know you're interested in hearing what they have to say, and I'm interested in what everybody's going to say.
Whoa. Thank you, Sam. Okay. The plan, I want to say two things before I start, so don't start it yet.
Okay.
One is, I really want to thank Andy and the company because they're our heroes. Yes men have kind of broken the eggshell over and over again and illuminated what's really happening by theater and by art, and you know, all of you are doing that too. So just want to thank you, and that's why I'm excited to come tomorrow as well. And the second thing I want to say is that our goal is to talk short, but to talk a little, because I feel like you should know where, you know, we're going to try to set a little framework for a discussion that I guess you all, or some of you, want to have about tactics, because I can't quite see diving into it without seeing if we have some assumptions in common, and I'm hoping that you'll contradict what I think is happening and freshen it up and challenge it and so on. So that's the caveats, okay? Go. So the theme of what I want to say, I have 3 points I'm going to make, 2 of them very quickly. One, and my theme is agitation lights up the truth. This is something I pulled this summer from Howard Zinn's fabulous collected works. I urge you all to get the collected works and to put it next to your bed and dip into it. But he wrote a fabulous essay in the late 60s. Can you all hear me? Yes. In the late 60s, in the early 60s. Okay. He wrote a fabulous essay about the early days of SNCC in the South. So, and he's writing about Kennedy as president, and he's talking about the difference between politicians and agitators, abolitionists and radicals. And so agitation lights up the truth. That's you all in this room, and I think the moment that we're in. So that's kind of my theme. 3 points. First, just a reminder that of the remarkable nature of 2011, when I think that there was international dialogue, almost a call and response in a way that used to take years. You know, so just to remember that Tunisia and Cairo and Yemen and Bahrain and Syria and the Arab Spring, which didn't happen in a moment but certainly started off the year of 2011, was then had another movement, another coda, if you will, in Madison, where we went, of course, as soon as the Madison occupation happened in Wisconsin. And the signs, you know, which I still have on my cell phone, were fabulous. You know, they were Tahrir West, you know, and you know, Arab Spring West, Midwest, Mideast, you know, one struggle, and those kind of handmade signs that make you realize that perhaps it wouldn't have happened that way without the inspiration of the Arab Spring. The Palestinian refugees at the fence, at the wall, at the barriers in southern Lebanon. The Russian demonstrations, who could have imagined the demonstrations that are roiling in Russia. Occupy, of course, all of you, leading to hundreds of occupies. Greece, the dreamers, the kids, documented kids risking their future and risking deportation by standing up and refusing to go along with our reactionary policy about immigration, and really reflecting the fact that around the world, migration is desperation and inevitable, no matter how many walls or barriers are built. It's what's happening because of the massive inequality of wealth. So that's kind of just a reminder of how much we're in a not just a global moment, but how rapid fire the global exchange is. It's almost as if the criticism and the analysis and the visuals are quickly inspiring each other and escalating as they go. Two, and this is, I think, I know you're all wrestling with this, but it's a challenge. I'm still wrestling with it. I think it's our job at every juncture to name the moment, to analyze where we are and who we are and what we might do. So I'm going to just make a rapid fire effort to do that. And I almost always start with Dr. King in '67 saying the greatest purveyor of violence on this earth is my own country. Now when King said that at Riverside Church, coming out against the Vietnam War after a decade of fighting racism and white supremacy entrenched in this country, he was breaking with incredible amount of pressure and tradition. And I think that that is still true today. That the greatest, not the only, but the greatest purveyor of violence on this earth is our own country. Now that just sets a framework. If you don't think it's true, a whole other set of things follow. If you think it's true, we go a different way. And I think that's true at home too now, because our national security apparatus that grew up in the decade since 9/11 is enormous, way beyond what it's ever been in American history. And we're, I think, in an era of, well, let me say pithily as I can. I think that the United States as a global power is in decline. That is to say, it's in important decline economically and politically. I have no idea how long that decline is going to take and how precipitous it's going to be. But it remains the dominant and overwhelming military power in the world. That's a very dangerous combination, to be losing economic and political power and to yet have at your disposal the drones, the expanded military bases, NATO, and so on. And speaking of NATO, let's talk about NATO for a minute, because we're in Chicago. As you all know, Occupy is coming May Day and staying the month. We hope all of you are going to multiply and send a lot of people to Chicago.
Invite them to stay on the 3rd floor.
Yeah, right. But
You're all welcome.
But it's almost filled, but we're going to overflow.
Yeah.
The importance of NATO, of course, is that it shows us exactly why what I just said about expanded military power in the face of declining economic and social power, political power, is so extraordinary. So you're wondering, the United States opens a military base in Australia. Really? In Australia? And then the CIA just showed up, or is showing up, announced yesterday they're showing up in Myanmar. Really? Our friend, Myanmar? Yes, so Hillary Clinton opened it up. Thailand, is kind of the epicenter right now of NATO activity. So right now, as we speak, the Operation Cobra Gold is going on. It's the largest military exercise in the history of the world. We haven't seen this on the front pages of the New York Times. But this is USPA COM, Pacific Alliance COM presence. And they're flexing their muscles at the doors of China, right? This is, right, today it looks like we're going to war with Iran. The United States is going to war with Iran, but we got a long-term stake here of the United States has a long-term stake in surrounding China. So this exercise, Cobra Gold, is NATO's 13,000 military personnel are exercising right in the South China Sea as we speak, from February 7th to the 17th. Kind of astonishing, right? I think it's astonishing. And NATO, it's just, I'm not going to give you the 1, 2, 3, but we all better know that NATO, it has nothing to do with North Atlantic, and actually operates right now in 4 continents, and a third of the countries in the world are part of the so-called alliance. So I'm going to read you just a couple of New York Times headlines, my favorites, just from the last few days, that I think make the point about declining economic and political power and rising military power. Okay. U.S. embassy hit by rocket attack in central Kabul. Okay. Poverty reaches 52-year peak, government says. U.S. scrambles to avert Palestinian vote at the UN. U.S. plans to cut its staff by half at the Iraq embassy. That's yesterday. I hope you all saw those pictures. For 9 years we haven't seen the Iraq embassy. But now we know that it's 104 acres, largest in the world. They say 2,000 diplomats plus contractors. So it's, you know, the United States built this massive thing like a country in the middle of Baghdad to stay forever. And of course, the Iraqis want us out, so they can't even get the food in from Kuwait. It's an article worth reading. U.S. and Japan in talks to expedite exit of 8,000 Marines in Okinawa. It's been going on for a decade, but the Japanese are increasingly incensed about it. And Libya struggles to curb militias as chaos grows. So these are just like, okay, here's the story, you know, important to see, I think. So my conclusion about where we are is that capitalism can't solve our basic needs. I know you're all shocked at that. But yeah, a little show of hands. I think that it's the logic, we know the logic of capital requires that every last thing is sold for profit, right? The very last thing. And so you can't get into a cab or a bus or ride an airplane or drive without having something right in front of your face that you should buy, that you must buy. And the, you know, watching the parking meters and the, you know, the destruction of the post office and the public libraries and everything. It's all part of this only profit, let's take it for the private sector and then destroy it. So this concentration of wealth, the destruction of our public sphere, our public space, our public ideas, and of course, with all of that, environmental degradation, and you know, less and less work, or less and less jobs, even though the work to be done is totally apparent. So, just a note here to let's come back and talk when we talk tactics about the general strike in Oakland Occupy, because there was an idea, and that was a really great performance day, in my opinion, one of the best performance days I've ever seen. Third is movement building, or the guerrilla tactics of political resistance, which is what you're all here about. You all know this, I'm just going to mention that without Seattle World Trade Organization demonstrations and the World Social Forum through the intervening decade, we wouldn't be where we are today. So there's many building blocks that start to light a prairie fire and then don't work for a variety of historical reasons. But I think that the whole, and also the one-day strike at the start of the Iraq War, the global strike, I think that's one of our ancestors about how we got here today. But one of the things since Occupy and since in 2011 that I want to note is kind of the solidarity and the way that Occupy, like Arab Spring and the United States, Occupy has both generated progeny, joined in solidarity with other struggles, and inspired new ones. So one example to me from this last year is the letters from the Pelican Bay prisoners to Occupy. I hope you all read it, but if you didn't, please Google it and get it, because the guys in total isolation, lockdown, maxi prisons in the very north on the border of Oregon and California in Pelican Bay prison wrote we're on a hunger strike last year, and it was broken twice. They inspired a statewide hunger strike of California prisoners. And they wrote a letter to Occupy, and I just feel like that kind of solidarity, debate, discussion from pretty much Black and Latino male prisoners locked up there with this room is to be treasured and to be written back to and to continue to inspire. The same is true for the women's reproductive rights. I don't even want to call it a movement, but look what just happened last week, and let's debrief that. Turns out, no, you can't take away our access and right to birth control and to basic health needs under the rubric of some right-wing religious agenda. You can't. So I think this is important. Union organizing, the theft of pensions, foreclosures. In Chicago, Occupy joined with the teachers union and the parents movement to prevent the further privatization of schools. I know some people aren't here today because they're over in Brooklyn occupying Mayor Bloomberg's effort to close schools here. The gay rights victories, including the one this week, yay. In California, knocking down Proposition 8. And I think cancel the debt, which is a great appropriation of the third world demand from the 1980s, right, to the World Bank and to the rich countries of the world. Cancel the debt. Now kind of brought home. I mean, we should cancel the debt. Certainly of students. Let's start there. But then of everybody, right? Of everybody. What is this? We're all indebted forever. It's insane. To who? To Goldman Sachs and the banks. So what do we want? I think we want to break with the liberal dream. I assume you all have done that. But we need to convince a lot of other people to do that. I think we want to break with American exceptionalism. The world is forcing that, but it's also going to increase the forces at home who want to insist on American exceptionalism. And we want to break with white supremacy. Always a challenge in every struggle, never taken for granted, cannot be assumed, must be worked at aggressively. And I'm going to mention the 3 goals that Manny Wallerstein and Grace Lee Boggs set at the U.S. Social Forum, and then I'm done. Is that all right? Because they're marvelous talk. I don't know if, were any of you there? Did you hear them? You need to see them, and you need to meet both of them, because they're so brilliant. And they talk together back and forth in this fabulous way, and there's a booklet that they published of their conversation there. But at the end of it, they said that there's 3 things that you do in all things, no matter what you're working in and what you're doing and what your question is. You press for it. You just press for it more, more, more. One is peace and an end to war and nuclear disarmament and the gun disarmament and the whole thing, okay? Peace, not war. 2, more equality. And that one it's a little more complicated because you actually have to see the discrimination and the rank inequality to press for equality. Obviously, that happens with the 99%, but it's also about a living wage and taxing the rich and Goldman Sachs and fighting for labor and pension rights and women's reproductive rights and LGBTQI equality and abolishing the prisons. Abolishing the prisons. You know that we have caged 2.3 million Americans, and 4 times that number under the prison system, under the surveillance system of prison, overwhelmingly for nonviolent offenses. So let's keep that in our mind, even though it's not visually in our space. And immigration is the means of survival. And 3, the third thing they call for is more democracy. Always more democracy. And the Occupy movement was instructional about that, instructional about giving life to the 50-year-old Port Huron statement slogan about participatory democracy, which is not a thing. It has to be invented and reinvented, and it has to be fought for at every stage. There's nothing obvious about it. It's time-consuming and infuriating, and you guys made it fun and theatrical and terrific. So let's agitate and light up the truth.
I think I'll talk just a bit about activism and tactics. Sam talked about the fact that, talked about the film and the lack of nostalgia, and it's true. We often get kind of identified as people from the 60s, and it's always seemed so strange to me, partly because the mythology of the 60s is part of what becomes a damper on activism today. The mythology that we had the best music, and Sam didn't mention also the best sex, which isn't true, still good, and the best demonstrations and the best everything, and it's utterly nonsense. It was like all times. And the other thing that I don't remember at all is on December 31st, 1969, I don't remember anyone turning to the others and saying, "God damn, the 60s is almost over." It's just not that kind of a thing. No one lives their lives by decades, and so the idea that anyone would be, you know, nostalgic for a ship that's already left the shore is so depressing that it makes me. But I think we kind of passed that, and I think what's exciting about the last 6 months is, and there's a lot of precedent. Bernadine pointed to a lot of it. Certainly the Arab Spring, certainly Madison, but being Chicagoans, we think a lot about the 2008 Republic Windows and Doors occupation, where they took over a factory and demanded that Bank of America, which has just been bailed out by the federal government, pony up and give them their due rights. And these were illegal, many of them people without documentation, and they fought and they won, and it was thrilling. We were in Chicago participating in the Immigrant Rights March.
So you're on.
So, yeah, let's get a few.
I don't know how to do it, but let's do 3 at a time, okay? And that way.
Comments, etc. Questions, anything?
It doesn't
Anybody?
have to be a question.
Are you shy? Anybody? No?
Oh,
Just wanted to ask, Bernie, you referenced it a little bit. One of the big changes today is the surveillance society, where it's all over. They watch everything, they see everything we do. and
Excuse me,
follow
Becky.
us.
They use a microphone so people in the back can
that's a
hear.
good idea. Good idea.
My question has to do with the surveillance society that we live in today, which is quite different from what it was like with the technology in the 60s. And how do you, with young people today seem to not care about privacy, or not be aware of that there's an issue about privacy. And how do you do your theater tactics and the nonviolent tactics you're talking about in the context of this surveillance society that is so persuasive?
Okay. Another question. We're going to take 3 or 4. Anybody else want to make a comment? Yeah. What thing, Mike? Everybody's going to have to get flexible here. If you
Hi.
have something you want to say, come on forward. Yeah.
Hi, I just read Jeremy Barron's book about you and the Rote Armee Fraktion. I think he compares you, favourably to them in Germany. I'm an admirer of what of your movement, and I'm fascinated by what happened to it. One of the things Varron ends by saying is that both you and the RAF were volatile expressions of a continuing conflict over the status and meaning of America. And as a newcomer to America, I'm also fascinated by some of the kind of constitutionalism or America foundationalism that I saw on Zuccotti Park. Is there anything about America that that can be mobilized for revolutionary struggle?
One more? Anybody? Yeah. Want to come forward? Yeah.
I think we should keep that one for stretching.
Yeah, we're doing it's as far as it can go.
Is it? It's as far as, no, it
Yeah, okay. Hi, I'm wondering, yeah, great to see you guys, and maybe advice is the wrong word, but why not? What kind of advice could you give us in terms of, it's winter right now, and I'm feeling a little burned out, there's kind of like this lull. I like when you talked about the rhythms of activism. So maybe advice for the long haul, that sort of thing. Thanks.
Well, it is winter, and we're conspiring, right? I mean, that's part of the good news, and we're not in the park while we're conspiring, and so I think that in this particular year, Occupy has really recognized that rhythm, and not, except in places where they kind of physically could, put themselves in too difficult of a tactical situation. So I don't have any wisdom. I mean, we certainly burnt ourselves intensely, and not doing that is always a good idea. So we're in this for the long haul, Yes, we're in this for the long haul? Okay, so, that means that, you're not being tested on how much you can stay up every night and how little sleep you have to have, which we did have competitive self-criticisms and self-criticism about in '69. And so you can, do the things you need to with your family and your loved ones and people who need your attention and are sick, and that's good. We're in it for the long haul, and I think that rhythm is important. So, it's hard to know how much the activity of last year is going to change your life. You're going to make those decisions every day. It's never one decision. America's very good at taking everybody back. The big American dream mythology is very good at taking everybody back. So the decision to step out and be an agitator is a constant decision. It's a decision you're going to remake all the time. I don't have anything wiser to say about it. I'm just going to say a word about technology, which you raised the surveillance point, but it often gets raised in many other technological ways. And I would say, of course, it's true that Homeland Security, 9/11, and the technology of today has made us, it's different. It's very different than the 70s. On the other hand, you're all very different with that technology. And we were different enough with the technology of the 70s to be able to assess what our strengths were and what their strengths were in a lot of ways. So that's what you're going to do. I don't think it's actually that different because we're all different technologically now. And so the technology is, I would say, almost a wash. It's both a weapon in the hands of the uprisers and it's a weapon in the hands of the state. And, so being smart, knowing what their strengths are, that's how it would play. Sorry.
Yeah, I think on the surveillance thing, I think we should all be very, very clear about our support of WikiLeaks and our support of Anonymous. I mean, I'm sorry? And Bradley Manning in particular. I was going to say that. Here's a guy who's been tortured and tormented, and his great crime was releasing... I'm sorry?
Louder.
Louder? I've got a mic. Is this mic not working? I understand. I'll come out in a minute. I don't know. Maybe that doesn't work. I'm sorry. I was just saying, WikiLeaks and Anonymous and for sure Bradley Manning, whose great crime is leaking government documents. And, the default position of our government is secrecy. And the fact that WikiLeaks exists and Anonymous exists, and any hacker who can break into this stuff is kind of turning the 1984 thing on its head. Big Brother has arrived. We are under surveillance at all time. Everybody knows we're here together. It's on our cell phones and everything else. So we're under surveillance, it's true. But we have to kind of also recognize that can be turned against. The wonderful thing that Anonymous did this week of breaking into an FBI telephone call was an extraordinary victory for us. It was a wonderful thing. So God bless the hackers. Advice. I said before, the measure of your success tactically is who did you reach and what did you learn. And what I want to contrast that with is the measure of your success is not how did I look on the evening news or did I look cooler than everybody else in that demonstration. When that's the standard, we all get screwed up and we lose our way. So the standard has to be not whether the New York Times approves or admires or freaks out. The standard has to be an educational standard. My advice is that, is that we be stronger, that we be smarter, that we hold on to the treasure of unity, even as we have struggles about differences, and notice the mocking tone of the bought media when there were struggles within the various Occupy camps. They had so much fun with that, but what do we expect? Of course there's going to be sharp differences. Of course there's going to be class and historically race divisions and a lot of other things. So let them have fun with it. Our job is to have sharp disagreement and hold on to the treasure of unity. We have to resist dogma. We have to, resist sloganeering and posing. We have to, and these are not as easy as they sound. Resist putting tactics above principle. That's why I said earlier, we're not tacticians. We don't think in terms of tactics. We think in terms of strategies, and we think in terms of principles. We think in terms of politics. Tactics should never be elevated, but at the same time, keep your own counsel. Have a mind of your own. You remember the great Life of Brian, who are those guys? The Life of Brian, Monty Python, that great movie where this, yeah, and such as I said, no proper names. This reluctant Messiah is on a rampart, and he's saying to the masses below, "I'm not the Messiah." And they all say, "You're not the Messiah." And he says, "No, no, no, you have minds of your own." And they all say, "We have minds of our own." And one guy in the crowd says, "It's funny, I don't feel like I have a mind of my own." And everybody smacks him and says, "Shut up. You have a mind of your own." Well, that's the world we live in. It's funny because it's where we are. And we have to kind of find ways to resist that kind of groupthink. Have a mind of your own, even as you fight for unity. Trust yourself. Seek balance. Breathe in, breathe out. Love one another. Learn from experience. This is critical that we learn from experience and don't just keep repeating the same crap over and over. Think of your ideas as hypotheses and questions, not points of arrival. And that's how I think of Occupy. I think of it as an invitation, not a point of arrival. And the idea, they don't have any, they don't have any demands. I listened to Mario Savio recently. What were his demands? Put your body on the machine, grind it to a halt, don't let them take our humanity. That was the demand, and it hit the zeitgeist just right. And so has this. We are part of it, we are all part of it, we should celebrate it, we should treasure it, and we should move on beyond it. Yes, sir?
Yeah, maybe I should use the microphone.
You have to come up here if you want to.
Okay.
But let's have 2 or 3 more, too.
Whoever wants to say something, come right up.
Okay, 4.
So this is picking up on Bernadette's idea of the long and the short haul. And I'm going to go back to 1968. I'm going to go back to your city, Chicago. I'm going to go back to the Democratic National Convention. I assume you know what happened there, and everybody know what happened there. It was a huge Abby Hoffman and Huey Newton, and it was a huge demonstration, disrupted the convention entirely. And the outcome finally was that youth did not support Hubert Humphrey because the Democrats were regarded as traitors, as they are still, and Nixon got elected. So the question is long haul, short haul. We're in an election year. So what do we do in relationship to, Obama is not the Obama we hoped he would be. The Democrats obviously are not the...
Messiah.
Correct. However, the other side is Nixon. The other side is, and I think that a huge backward step came in the Nixon-Reagan era. And if Humphrey had won, just like as if Gore had won, it would be different. No. Excuse me. Gore won in the way you're saying he won. But the fact is, we got Bush, who won. So the question is, corrupt or not corrupt? That's what happened. So I'm talking short haul, long haul. And I, having been part of the 68 brouhaha in that actual, it actually was organized, called the Festival of Life, out of the TDR office. So I just want to ask you, what are you going to do for this election?
Okay, yes.
No, what I mean by,
No, are you going to participate? We got it, good.
Yeah.
Hi, I run a theater company and I'm a director, and I've sort of been thinking about how to use the thing that I find is my strongest method of expression to raise more awareness socially and politically about sort of where I feel like we've come given what happened from basically 1941 to 1969 and how sort of the dropping of the atomic bomb led to everything else and how that could be a cycle and where we are in that cycle now. And I guess my big question is, just from what you have seen in terms of theater that speaks to political concerns or social concerns, what have you found to be linking factors that have made certain pieces stronger than others, just as I try to make my work speak more clearly without becoming cliche or just like everything else.
Fabulous. Great. There was another woman right here. Thank you. Yes?
Not yet. It's true.
What?
She said you didn't answer my question.
Okay. I'm worried about divisions, and like we heard earlier about people who think about working within the political system and people who disagree with that, about tactics. There's a lot of potential for divisiveness in the movement, and I'm really concerned about that, and I want to know what you would have done differently, or if you would have done anything differently to avoid divisiveness in your time, or this is all your time, but you know, divisiveness. I also want to know if you have any advice for Chicago. I've heard a lot about the new laws that have been put in place, and I also want to state that Occupy Chicago has not called for people to come on May 1st. They actually haven't put out a call yet. It might be May 12th or later on. And they have expressed to me and expressed to other folks that they're quite concerned about these new laws, and so I'm wondering what you know about that, what you can share.
I'm gonna next turn around, okay? Okay, well, you want to talk about elections and the DNC, so I'm going to talk about theater and divisions. I'm not an artist, so can you hear me? Okay, come on in. There's lots of room. I suggest you come in. Can you make a path? Because I'm speaking right into the microphone. What can we do? Can everybody make a path here? And if there's a fire, we're going to be very orderly. I think that the role of theater and the arts is absolutely critical, and humor, to how we deal with many of the questions that you're all raising about repression. Those were principled issues. Those were not about tactics. Those were absolutely, in my mind, about the two most principal issues of the moment. So hard to do, but just try not to be mean when you fight fiercely. I guess that's, and I'm mean. Bill can tell you. I can really get into it. So yeah. Now, well, it's right to feel passionately about these questions because you don't want to take the wrong turn. And speaking of the wrong turn.
I love that. Don't be mean. I think you should write that down. Don't be mean. That's what she said to our granddaughters a couple of days ago when one was picking on the other. Don't be mean. I love that. But it's true. One of the ways you can check yourself is on this question of self-righteousness. When you're sure you're right, that you know everything. And that leads to a kind of dogma and self-referencing and living in the well-lit prison of a single good idea. That's bad stuff. And that's what I would do differently. I think for all the things we've been criticized for and kind of the stereotypes of our movement held up, I don't really regret much of the tactical stuff, but I deeply regret the turning on our friends and the turn towards self-righteousness and sectarianism and dogmatism. I think it was a disaster, and we tried to pull back from it, but probably not in time.
And it wasn't just us.
It was everybody. It was in the water.
We take a lot of heat, and we've done a lot of self-criticism. But let's just say, at that moment, when it fractured, everybody was.
Well, and what I love is we were self-righteous, and we've talked about it a lot since. But what I love is the self-righteous commentary denouncing us, which has gone on for 4 decades now. that somebody knew what the right thing to do. Well, I'm not so sure that's right. I mean, nobody in my own family of 5 kids. One of us ran to Canada. One of us joined, went to the communes. One of us did this. One of us did that. And I did what I did. None of us actually ended the war. None of us actually ended white supremacy. So, complicated.
Best songs.
Say it again?
We had the best songs.
We had the best songs, right? And we had, yeah. I have a different interpretation of '68. The Chicago demonstration at the Democratic Convention was not huge. It was actually tiny for its time. It was very tiny, and part of the reason it was tiny is because Mayor Daley scared the crap out of everybody by saying there was going to be a bloodbath in Chicago, and he showed his propensity toward bloodbaths, and people stayed away. So it was actually a relatively small demonstration for the time. It was one of those things, though, like Woodstock. There's nobody of our age who's on the left who doesn't claim to have been there because it was iconic, and we all felt like we were there. I actually was there. It was pretty small. I got the arrest record to prove it. But you know, so I don't think it was huge. The other thing is that people went to Chicago, and two Americas faced off against each other. In a way, like the 1%, the 99%. It was a face-off with those who thought that, you know, the America that said that, you know, everything is okay and everything's getting better, and the youth and the African Americans, the Black freedom struggle, and others saying no, everything's not okay, and we need a new direction altogether. It's also true that McCarthy ran for president. It's also true that Bobby Kennedy ran for president. You know, the thing that's amazing about that year, if you think about the beginning of the year, the Tet Offensive happened in the beginning of the year. The Mexican shootout, the shooting of the Mexican demonstrators happened. The Prague Spring happened, and then what I was going to say is that Lyndon Johnson announced at the end of March 1968 that he would step down from the presidency and work to end the war. We celebrated so riotously in Ann Arbor and other places. We thought we had won. 3 years of war, 1 million deaths, but now it would end. 5 days later, King was dead, and America blew up. A few months later, Kennedy was dead, and a few months after that, Henry Kissinger emerged from the swamp he was living in, Harvard, and had a plan to expand the war. So it's not right to blame whatever happened, or to make a direct connection between whatever happened and the election of Nixon. McCarthy, Kennedy, the McCarthy kids, they were all part of what happened in Chicago. But the other thing I would say is we see a pattern here, and it's a pattern that I worry about. Every 4 years, the national campaign gets revved up, and the circus comes to town, and people, especially young people who want to be political, go into those campaigns in droves without an analysis and without an organization, so that if they win, they're ecstatic and they think they changed the world, and if they lose, they're depressed and they go back to what? To not much. I think we have to be much smarter and say, let's look a minute at history. The fact is, well, two quick things. I'm less interested in presidential elections than I am in building movements on the ground. I think that where we find real change coming is from the bottom. Remember, Lyndon Johnson, who passed the most far-reaching civil rights legislation in history, was not part of the Black freedom movement. And FDR wasn't part of the labor movement, and Abraham Lincoln never belonged to an abolitionist party. Something was happening on the ground that made those three presidents stand up in history. But the historical thing that was happening was not them, it was what was pushing them. And so I think we spend way too much time looking at the sites of power we have no access to, including the Pentagon and the Congress and the White House, and increasingly no access to. And then we ignore the sites of power we have absolute access to: the neighborhood, the school, the workplace, the university, the classroom. And again, Occupy has done a good job of turning our attention to something more substantive than what's going to happen in the Tweedledee, Tweedledum, and Tweedledummer dance that goes on every 4 years. I'm not saying there's no difference, and I'm not saying don't work in a campaign, but I am saying be smart about it. When you say that President Obama disappointed you, for example, I think maybe you weren't paying attention to what he was saying during the campaign, because what he was saying very clearly was that I'm a moderate, middle-of-the-road, compromising, he might have added ambitious politician. He was all that, and the right looked at him and said, no, he's a secret socialist who pals around with black nationalists and others, and he's a Muslim, and on and on. The left looked at him saying that and said, he's winking in my direction. He loves us. No, he doesn't. So he is who he said he was. The thing I worry about, and I'll end with this, but the thing I worry about in that approach is to say, it's an election year. Therefore, would all the women please shut the fuck up? And would all the gays get back in the closet immediately? And black people disappear for a minute because we got to get this election done. And then we'll get everything right. No, it doesn't work that way. We have to demand that things get right now in order for them to ever get right in the future.
I want to say, we'll come back to you, but I want to say just one additional thing to this, which is, I wouldn't have said, in your perfect rap, I wouldn't have said join the campaigns. Because I think the issue is we should vote. We should vote. And we should urge everybody to vote. Enough. We should not pay attention to it. We should watch ESPN all day, all night, or something, so that we don't hear this kind of craziness that's going on, because we know it's a bought election. Everybody in America now knows it's a bought election. And it's not that it doesn't matter. It matters enormously. We should vote because we should vote locally and for a variety of reasons. But that's not where our energy is, and that is not where any fundamental change is going to come from. None.
I got to say one thing about you. Wait, one thing. So Bernadine said that you should look at the ESPN. Every morning we have an argument because I want to listen to NPR and get angry. I want to listen and I get pissed off. You know what? I get very pissed off when they say the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which thinks everyone should have a chance for a productive and healthy life. Not a productive and healthy life, just a chance. But Bernadine listens to Mike and Mike every morning.
It clears your dreams. It clears your dreams and prepares you for the next step. I want to say one more thing, which is that the class character of the state system, all of it, is so entrenched that we have to say that we could elect God and she would disappoint, okay? It is in its nature. This is nothing about, yes, of course we should vote for Obama. It's just no question, whoever else is running. Or a local candidate that you know. But it is in that system, and that's why I think starting off by setting the framework about who we are and where we are is just critical. You asked a question about us in Germany. Is that right? Well, but you were saying that Jeremy Veron's book, which compares us and the Rav. Yeah?
He says both those movements were expressions of, volatile expressions of a conflict about the meaning of America. Can it be redeemed? Is there anything revolutionary about mobilizing the idea of America? Are you Americans?
Yeah, well, she just changed her question. That's so unfair. She made it much more complicated, because I was going to say, actually, us and the Rav were, I think, quite different. We verged, and we took very different steps, which are, I think, explainable by the difference between the first generation after World War II in Germany and us coming out of the 50s. So on. So that's a little different. There were remarkable similarities. We both had SDSs. We both had women's movements. We both verged into a lot of militancy. And we both had very repressive state responses. But I think that there's a lot of young scholars looking at this relationship between Germany and us, because there was a lot of relationship, in part because of the military bases, the U.S. military bases planted in the middle of Germany. Ronstadt's still there in Germany, where GIs were, about to go or coming back from Vietnam, and were deserting in significant numbers. So that's all just very interesting to me. And, at the same time that we reject a lot of the iconic things that America stands for, of course we're Americans. We never left the United States when we were fugitives. We are absolute products of the Midwest. It's pretty obvious to a New York audience that we are. And I think our job, and the nice thing about the United States is that it was born in an anti-colonial fervor, and yet was a colonizing empire, right, that committed genocide in order to even exist. And so I think it gives us that double whammy of understanding the need for revolution in different generations, and kind of the weight that it carries being an American, and why we recognize Israel, for example, in ourselves as an occupying, not in the good occupy, in the other occupying sense of the word. You had the next question, 2, 3. I'm going to start here because he's been moving. Okay? It won't reach. You're going to have to step over.
Okay. So, as many, I assume it's on many people's minds that we're in the middle of this kind of debate about tactics, about diversity of tactics. And one friend of mine just pointed out that those of us on the Gandhi-like nonviolence side of this discussion are actually being pretty crappy listeners to people who are favoring diversity of tactics, which really wasn't alive for me until I realized exactly how little I actually know about why I think, the Gandhi-like nonviolence. So, I mean, if you can help us in this discussion on, directly in any way, that would be awesome.
Well, I'd like to hear a little more about it, but you just described a nice, a nice opening right there. Yes.
Yeah, I was in particular concerned about the erosion of civil liberties in terms of the Constitution with the NDAA. And how do you feel about Obama signing that and putting specific words that Americans have, can be indefinitely detained? I mean, this to me is one of the scariest laws that ever has come through, and it sounds a lot like fascism and the same tactics that they used. And I also believe that the NDAA is a reaction possibly to the Occupy Wall Street movement because they're scared. They're scared of people on the street now, and now that's why they put the words, Americans can be detained, and also because of the economic situation. They're afraid of the backlash. But so how do you feel about this coming to pass and that Congress passed it overwhelmingly, majority? I believe everyone's bought and paid for almost, except maybe Ron Paul. And I think the elections is a sham. I think they're trying to divide people between the Republican and Democratic Party. I mean, on issues that I think everyone feels the same way about, civil liberties and wanting a good life, and they just find a way to create this charade to believe that you have a choice, and it's not a choice. I don't know, I just...
Good. Let's do one more. You have to lean in, because
Okay.
they're going to...
Sorry. This is a related question to the one that someone asked a second ago. I was wondering how you defined violence in the 60s and 70s, how you define it now, if that definition has changed at all, and if, on your own definition, you have ever been involved in an act of violence.
The first rule of activism, don't be mean. Well, let's talk, you're basically both raising questions about diversity of tactics, direct action, and tactics, violence, including violence. And then you're raising the question of fear. I would put that under the big rubric, and somebody else just said it about Chicago, too, and how scary our mayor is.